Your brain is lying to you right now. If you stand completely alone at the bottom of a steep hill wearing a heavy backpack, your visual cortex, the part of your brain that processes sight, actually tilts the landscape upward, turning a manageable slope into an impossible cliff just to force you to sit down. This is the documented biological science of how a best friend literally flattens the physical world in front of your eyes. But when that social connection is cut, your brain enters a state of high alert panic that can physically damage your body. Meet Leo. He's 17 years old, standing at the base of a steep paved path leading up to his house. His canvas backpack is stuffed to the limit with heavy textbooks, his heavy laptop, and the exhausting weight of a long school day, digging deep into his shoulders. As he looks up, the path does not look like a normal suburban street. To Leo, it looks like a towering mountain. For a very long time, scientists believed Leo's brain worked exactly like a simple video camera. They figured his eyes measured the physical angle of the slope, his brain calculated the mathematical distance, and he saw a perfect, objective truth. If the hill was exactly 30 degrees, Leo saw exactly 30 degrees. But in 2008, a psychologist named Simone Schnall and her collaborators at the University of Virginia realized that the human brain is not a camera at all. It is a ruthless survival calculator. Simone Schnall wanted to test how we actually see the physical world when under physical pressure. She gathered a group of students and put them at the base of a steep hill. But she did not just let them stand there in comfort. She strapped heavy backpacks onto them. These packs were filled with dense iron exercise weights, weighing exactly 1/5 of each student's total body weight. Imagine carrying a giant, shifting bag of wet sand strapped tightly across your shoulders. The students had to just stand there, bearing the weight. Therefore, the researchers asked the physically burdened students to estimate the actual steepness of the hill in front of them. The researchers handed the isolated students a manual dial and a visual board, telling them to adjust the line to match the angle of the slope they saw. When the student stood at the bottom of the hill completely alone, something bizarre and terrifying happened. They did not see a 30-degree hill. Their brains radically scaled up the slope. They saw it as way steeper, way more daunting, and practically impossible to climb. The heavy, shifting backpack had actively tricked their entire visual system. Because their physical bodies were carrying so much more weight, their brains artificially tilted the physical dirt and pavement up in their minds. The brain was sending a desperate warning sign that this climb was going to cost far too much energy. The brain was deliberately trying to protect them by making the task look far too hard to even attempt, hoping they would just give up and save their energy. But then, Simone Schnall introduced a radical twist that shattered this visual barrier. She had some of the exhausted students stand at the bottom of the hill with a friend. The friend did not help them carry the heavy backpack. They did not reach over and hold their hand. They did not physically push them up the hill. They did not even have to speak a single word of encouragement. They just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, looking quietly up at the exact same steep hill. Yet, when the researchers asked these accompanied students to estimate the steepness using the manual dial, the number suddenly plummeted. The hill instantly looked visibly flatter to them. The physical angle of the hill in their minds dropped by several severe degrees. Simply having another living human being standing within arm's reach fundamentally changed the literal picture the eyes captured and sent to the visual cortex. The hill looked easier, flatter, and completely manageable, simply because they were not standing there alone. Therefore, the scientists decided to push deeper to measure the exact biological mechanics of these relationships. They looked at how long the pairs of students had known each other, how much they genuinely trusted each other, and how deep their friendship actually was in daily life. They discovered a shocking direct link. The longer and stronger the friendship, the flatter the hill physically appeared on the visual board. A casual acquaintance flattened the hill only a little bit, but a best friend, someone who had been there through the worst, most humiliating days of middle school and the hardest family dramas, flattened the slope drastically. For Leo, standing heavily at the bottom of his paved path, this means his eyes are not just measuring dirt, concrete, and gravity. Dramatic. His eyes are actively measuring his social support network. If his absolute best friend is standing right there beside him, Leo's brain looks at the exact same steep climb and decides it is nothing more than a minor, effortless slope. But how does the human brain pull off this massive physical illusion? To answer that, we have to look at the work of a neuroscientist named James Cohen and his breakthrough scientific model called social baseline theory. For centuries, traditional psychology simply assumed that the natural, default state of a human being is to be an isolated individual. We think of ourselves as single, independent batteries that have to manage our own electrical power, protect our own personal space, and fight our own grueling battles. We falsely think being totally alone is the absolute default, and being with other people is just a nice extra bonus. James Cohen scientifically proved that this entire assumption is completely backward. Our brains absolutely do not view the physical world from an isolated perspective. To a human brain, the fundamental default baseline of basic survival is deep connection. We evolved in tribes, in close families, in tight-knit hunting groups where sharing food, sharing warmth, and offering physical protection was the only possible way to stay alive. Therefore, when Leo is standing alone, his brain does not think he is just a normal, independent teenager having a quiet afternoon. Instead, Leo's nervous system senses the heavy silence. It actively notices the terrifying absence of other human heartbeats, other watching eyes, and other protective hands. To his ancient, millions of years old survival brain, being completely alone is a literal life or death emergency. It immediately triggers a quiet, high-stress physiological state called vigilance. In this intense, vigilant state, Leo's brain starts hoarding all of its chemical resources. It assumes it has to do absolutely everything by itself. It has to watch for hidden danger, hunt for food, and carry the incredibly heavy backpack all alone. Because it desperately wants to conserve critical energy, it makes every single physical task look massively harder than it actually is. The hill looks much steeper because his isolated brain is actively trying to scare him into sitting down and hoarding his internal battery power. But the millisecond a best friend steps into the frame, everything biologically changes. The brain instantly registers their physical presence and sighs in massive relief. It suddenly realizes it can share the heavy load. If a predator attacks, there are 4 eyes watching instead of 2. If the heavy canvas backpack gets too crushing, there are 2 extra shoulders to bear the weight. This is not just a warm, comforting feeling, it is a literal biological budget cut. Truth is, your brain immediately shuts down its high alert stress response. It drastically lowers your racing heart rate, drops your toxic cortisol levels, and frees up a massive amount of physical energy. Because your brain suddenly has access to this enormous extra pool of shared energy, it decides the steep hill is not a dangerous threat anymore. It rapidly rewires your visual cortex, lowers the physical angle of the hill in your mind, and confidently tells you that you can easily make the climb. Friendship, in a very real biological sense, is a physical resource. It is an asset, exactly like food, clean water, or oxygen, that keeps us healthy by lightening our daily physical load. But what happens when those bonds are suddenly cut? We live in a world where we are more connected online than ever, yet young people report feeling lonelier than any generation in human history. We move schools, we drift away from childhood friends, or we isolate ourselves behind glowing screens when things get tough. When we sever these social bonds, we are not just losing a chat partner. We are literally stripping our brains of their primary power source. Without those connections, our bodies start to physically wear out. The constant stress of thinking we have to carry the entire world alone damages our hearts, our immune systems, and our mental health. This is why reaching out to someone is not a sign of weakness. It is a biological survival strategy. Find your person. Let the world flatten out. But if long-term isolation forces your brain into a state of constant, exhausting vigilance, what does that chronic panic actually do to the physical tissue inside your head over months or years? Click the next video to discover how extreme isolation alters the human brain's physical structure.